The rain hammered Dallas like a punishment that night, slicking the streets and filling the gutters by the time Daniel Whitmore pulled his pickup into the driveway. He killed the engine, rolled his stiff shoulders, and sat in silence for a moment, letting the wipers thump a final beat before shutting off. 12 hours under the hood of a Chevy Suburban had left his hands raw, grease still packed under his nails. But the bills were paid. The shop had 2 more jobs lined up, and his son Liam would be waiting with that smile that made the grind worth it. When Daniel stepped into the house, the first thing that hit him wasn't the warmth of home but the cold smell of perfume. Expensive, sharp, the kind of scent no mechanic's paycheck ever bought. Cassandra stood in the living room wearing a silk dress the color of midnight, diamonds at her throat catching the weak light. She didn't look like a wife waiting up. She looked like someone dressed to be seen. In her hand were papers, neat and deliberate. "You're late. Again." Her voice had an edge Daniel knew well, but tonight it cut differently. She held out the stack like a dealer laying down a losing hand. "I can't do this anymore, Daniel. I won't spend my life poor." His jaw tightened. He wiped his hands on his work pants, leaving faint black streaks across the denim. "Poor? The mortgage is paid. The lights are on. The boy's got everything he needs. That ain't poor, Cassandra. That's living honestly. Honesty doesn't buy me the life I deserve." She stepped closer, her perfume choking the room. "You're a mechanic, Daniel. A grease monkey. I got married down. I won't grow old in some house where the biggest dream is paying off tires one set at a time." Before he could answer, a small voice broke through. Liam patted in, clutching his blanket, eyes wide and wet. "Mommy, don't go," he whispered, tugging at her dress. "Please don't leave me and Daddy." Cassandra glanced down, her face softening for half a second before the cold mask snapped back into place. She pried his fingers off her gown like he was dirt on the hem. "You'll understand when you're older," she said flatly. Headlights cut across the window. A black Maybach waited at the curb, engine purring like a predator. Daniel stepped between his boy and the door. "So that's it? Some slick suit in a fancy car waves his wallet, and you're gone." His voice was steady, but beneath it was steel, years of swallowing anger that finally sharpened to a blade. Cassandra met his eyes without flinching. "At least he's a man who knows how to provide." The words landed harder than the rain on the roof. Daniel's hands curled into fists, not from helplessness but from restraint. If he let the rage loose, it would burn the whole house down, and Liam didn't deserve that. He bent, scooped up his son, and held him against his chest as Cassandra turned without another word. The click of her heels on the porch, the slam of the door, the roar of the Maybach pulling away, that was the sound of a family breaking. Daniel stood in the silence, Liam's tears soaking into his shirt, and let the storm outside drown the one inside. He pressed his lips to his boy's hair and swore under his breath, "She may walk out, son, but I'll never leave you. Never." The rain kept falling, but Daniel Whitmore had already begun the long climb from the wreckage. The morning after Cassandra left, Daniel sat at the kitchen table staring at the untouched bowl of cereal Liam had pushed away. The boy sat quiet, his small hands fiddling with the spoon. Daniel's stomach churned, not from hunger but from the silence. He wanted to smash something, roar against the walls, but he held it in. Liam needed a father who could carry weight, not one who collapsed under it. The phone rang. A law firm downtown. Whitmore and Associates, the secretary said. Not his shop's creditors, not Cassandra's lawyers. Something else. They asked him to come immediately. 2 hours later, Daniel sat in a paneled office that smelled of old leather and dust. The senior attorney, a sharp-eyed man named Caldwell, slid an envelope across the table. "It concerns your uncle, Marcus Whitmore. He passed last month. Left you his estate." Daniel frowned. Uncle Marcus had been the family's ghost, an eccentric bachelor who disappeared for years at a time. The last memory Daniel had was of Marcus dropping a cigar in his lap at a 4th of July cookout and laughing like the devil himself. Caldwell cleared his throat. "The estate totals approximately $500 million. The words hit like a wrench to the skull. Daniel blinked, leaned back, and let out a slow whistle. "You sure you've got the right Whitmore?" The lawyer didn't smile. "There's one condition. The will specifies that you cannot disclose this inheritance for 1 year. Not to friends, not to family, not even to your son until the time expires. If the condition is violated, the entire estate transfers to charity." Daniel's jaw flexed. "Why?" The lawyer slid a handwritten letter across the desk. The paper smelled faintly of cigar smoke, Marcus's scrawl sharp and deliberate. "Danny, money can build you or rot you. I've seen men lose themselves the moment the zeros landed. Don't let it own you. Use this year to build something real. For yourself. For that boy of yours. Build a legacy, not a cage. If you can stand the weight of silence, the fortune is yours. If not, it was never meant to be." Daniel read it twice, the words burning into his brain. His uncle hadn't left him a gift, he'd left him a test. He folded the letter, slid it into his jacket, and rose from the chair. Caldwell asked if he wanted a car service back home. Daniel shook his head. He preferred the sound of his pickup, even if the muffler rattled. On the drive back through Dallas, Daniel's thoughts tightened into something hard and sharp. Cassandra had walked out to chase money. She had no idea she'd left behind more than she could ever dream of. But Marcus's words stuck. "Don't let it own you." He gripped the wheel, glanced at his son in the rearview mirror, Liam asleep in the booster seat, and made a vow. "We'll do this right, kiddo. Quiet. Solid. No one's taking what's ours ever again." The rain from last night had dried, but Daniel Whitmore carried a storm inside him now. One he'd keep locked tight until the year was up, and the world finally learned who they'd underestimated. For weeks, Daniel lived like nothing had changed. He woke before dawn, packed Liam's lunch, and walked him into kindergarten with grease already under his nails. Then he went straight to the shop, where busted transmissions and dented fenders didn't care that he was sitting on a fortune. Customers still slapped him on the back, called him Danny the Fix-It Man, and handed over their keys with the same trust they always had. But beneath the routine, he was building something. Quietly, Marcus's letter had carved itself into his bones. Build a legacy, not a cage. So Daniel didn't buy a mansion or parade around in tailored suits. Instead, he called in favors from old buddies in construction, trucking, and logistics. He bought struggling auto shops under shell companies, invested in scrap yards, towing outfits, and machine parts suppliers. Businesses other men overlooked because they weren't glamorous. At night, after putting Liam to bed, Daniel spread blueprints and ledgers across the kitchen table. He wasn't a Wall Street man, but he knew engines, margins, and hard work. What he didn't know, he hired for. A discreet CFO named Alan Price, recommended by Caldwell, who kept numbers clean and questions minimal. The work kept him steady, but it was Liam who anchored him. When the boy woke from nightmares, murmuring about his mother walking away, Daniel was there. He took Liam fishing on Saturdays, coached his t-ball games, and sat with him through counseling sessions where a soft-spoken therapist helped Liam put words to the ache Cassandra had left behind. "Is she ever coming back?" Liam asked one night, curled against his father's chest. Daniel tightened his arms around him. "She made her choice, son, but I'm here, always." That's a promise carved in stone. That promise became his compass. By the end of the year, Daniel's shop had quietly expanded into a network across Texas, all under different names. He established a foundation for single fathers, funneling part of his inheritance into scholarships, food drives, and housing support. No press, no cameras, just work done in silence. Still, every time he signed a new contract, every time a ledger closed in the black, a fire burned in his chest. Cassandra had left because she thought he'd never be more than a grease-stained mechanic. What she didn't know, what the world didn't yet know, was that Daniel Whitmore was laying down steel and concrete for an empire. And when the year was up, when the gag order lifted, he'd be ready. Not to boast, not to flaunt, but to plant a flag so tall the whole damn world, Cassandra included, would see what a real man built when the storm came. Miami glittered the way Cassandra always imagined paradise should. Palm trees wrapped in lights, champagne flutes sweating in the humid night air, and yachts cutting white scars across the water. Victor Cole's world was silk sheets, penthouse balconies, and black credit cards that never got declined. Cassandra adapted fast. She learned how to pose just right for Instagram sunsets, how to angle her diamond bracelets so they caught the light. She bragged online about dinners that cost more than Daniel's monthly mortgage and snapped selfies with celebrities Victor brushed shoulders with. To her followers, she was proof that a girl from Texas could trade up if she had the guts to walk away. But beneath the gloss, the seams were already showing. Victor was generous, yes, but only when the cameras were on. In private, his temper ran short, and his phone never left his hand. He drank hard, gambled harder, and snapped at Cassandra when she asked questions about business. "You wouldn't understand," he'd say, eyes sharp, voice final. At night, she sometimes caught him pacing the balcony, whispering into the phone in Spanish, his shoulders tight. Once, she overheard words she didn't want to believe: debt, federal, offshore. Still, Cassandra pushed the unease down. She drowned it in champagne, covered it with silk, and polished it with hashtags. The hunger from her childhood, the gnawing shame of watching her mother clip coupons at the grocery store, still haunted her. She'd sworn she would never go back to that life, no matter what it took. But hunger had a way of sneaking in, even when the fridge was full. Victor's payments started slowing. The luxury boutiques stopped extending credit. One afternoon, a jeweler refused her Amex with a polite but pointed smile. Cassandra laughed it off, but her stomach twisted as she slid the bracelet back onto the counter. At a dinner party, she leaned in to one of Victor's associates, purring about the next big deal. The man only chuckled, swirling his whiskey. "Better hope the tide comes in before the bottom drops out, sweetheart." That night, lying awake in the penthouse with Victor snoring beside her, Cassandra scrolled through her old photos, the ones with Liam, the birthday cakes Daniel made from scratch, the little house with rain on the windows. She shoved the memories away, locking her phone, but they kept coming back, sharper than any diamond. Miami was a dream, but somewhere deep in her gut, Cassandra knew dreams could sour, and when they did, they tasted a lot like hunger. Years slipped by with the steady rhythm of work and fatherhood. Daniel didn't chase the spotlight, he chased stability, brick by brick, bolt by bolt. While men like Victor flaunted their wealth with borrowed money, Daniel built his fortune the way he built engines. Carefully, with patience and no wasted motion. His auto network stretched across Texas, then beyond. A small trucking company he bought for pennies grew into a regional carrier. A warehouse renovation turned into a logistics hub. But the real turning point came when Alan, his CFO, suggested taking a chance on a startup no one believed in. Some kids working out of a garage on a new kind of energy-efficient engine part. Daniel studied their work, saw the same grit in them that he saw in himself, and invested quietly. When the company went public, it hit like a thunderclap. Daniel's net worth rocketed past $1 billion. But he didn't move into glass towers or gold-plated mansions. He stayed in Dallas, expanding the foundation he'd built for single fathers. Trade schools opened under his name, offering men the chance to learn skills, to stand on their own feet. Scholarships flowed, not to the privileged, but to the overlooked. Reporters tried to sniff him out. Rumors swirled about the mechanic who'd gone silent and reemerged with invisible influence in half a dozen industries. But Daniel brushed it off. Let them speculate. He wasn't interested in headlines. What mattered was Liam. The boy was growing into a young man, sharp-eyed, thoughtful, carrying none of his mother's hunger for hollow things. Daniel made sure Liam knew the value of sweat and patience. They worked side by side in the garage, restoring old muscle cars, the smell of motor oil and cinnamon rolls filling the house on weekends. It was in one of those quiet stretches of life that Sarah Martinez came into the picture. She was a pro bono attorney Daniel met at a fundraiser for the foundation. Brown hair tied back, sleeves rolled up, speaking fire about fathers fighting custody battles against stacked odds. She didn't recognize him as a billionaire. She only saw a man who cared about his son. Over time, Sarah became more than an ally. She became the steady warmth Daniel hadn't known he was missing. Liam took to her, too, slipping his hand into hers on walks without hesitation. For the first time in years, Daniel allowed himself to breathe. not as a man betrayed, but as a man who had rebuilt his world. The fortune was real. The empire was real. But the true measure of it all was in the small things. His son's laughter, the grease on his hands, the trust in Sarah's eyes. Daniel Whitmore had become a billionaire. But he still woke up each morning like a mechanic, with work to do and people depending on him. Cassandra used to wake in silk sheets with sunlight pouring through glass walls high above Miami. Now she woke on a sagging couch in a friend's spare condo, the blinds drawn, her phone silent. Victor Cole was gone. The headlines had hit like a grenade. Federal investigation targets coal enterprises. Offshore accounts frozen. Properties seized. Victor disappeared into the wind, leaving his so-called empire in ashes. Cassandra went from penthouses and chauffeurs to eviction notices and locked accounts in the space of a month. At first, she told herself it was temporary. She strutted into boutiques like nothing had changed, only to feel her cheeks burn when her cards declined. She called old friends for lunch, only to find their schedules suddenly too busy. The diamond bracelets she once flashed online ended up pawned for pennies. The humiliation cut deeper than hunger. One night, after another dinner of microwaved noodles, she scrolled back through her Instagram feed. Photos of yachts, champagne towers, sunsets with Victor's arm draped around her. Thousands of likes. Women praising her glow-up. Lies carved into pixels. A knock at the door pulled her back. A former friend stood there, arms crossed, eyes full of pity and venom. "I warned you, Cass," she said softly. "I told you not to leave your son." The words hit harder than any slap. For the first time since walking out that rainy night in Dallas, Cassandra felt the full weight of her choices. She saw Liam's face in her mind, the boy tugging her dress, begging her not to leave, and realized she'd traded her child's trust for a man who'd vanished without a goodbye. She sank onto the couch, hands trembling, mascara streaking as tears finally cracked the mask. The world she had chased had burned out, and all she was left with was silence. The press conference wasn't Daniel's idea. Left to himself, he would have kept building in silence, letting the empire grow without headlines. But Alan, his CFO, and Sarah both pressed him. Sometimes the world needed a symbol, not just a shadow. So he stood behind a simple wooden podium on the steps of a Dallas high school, not in a ballroom or country club, but in the kind of place where kids carried backpacks patched with duct tape. Cameras crowded the lawn, reporters buzzing with questions about the man they'd nicknamed the Quiet Billionaire. Daniel adjusted the microphone, his work-rough hands steady. Liam stood to his left in a suit that hung a little loose on his teenage frame. Sarah stood to his right, her presence calm and grounding. "I was raised to believe a man's worth isn't in what he earns, but in what he builds," Daniel began, voice deep and unshaken. "For too long, too many kids in this country grow up without someone to build with them. That ends today." He announced a pledge of $100 million, funding trade schools, scholarships, and children's programs across the state. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Reporters shouted over one another, questions firing like bullets. But Daniel didn't stand. He spoke plainly, like he did in his shop, telling them this was about legacy, not luxury. When the cameras panned wider, they caught something the money couldn't buy. The way Liam leaned against his father, the way Sarah rested a steady hand on his back. Family, not a fortune. The headlines the next morning were relentless. Mechanic turned billionaire gives back. The Quiet Billionaire speaks. From Greece to greatness. But Daniel didn't care about the words. What mattered was the spark in the eyes of the kids who walked into that high school the next day, knowing someone believed in their future. He had spent years carrying the storm Cassandra left behind. Now he stood in the sunlight, not just a man who survived betrayal, but a man who built something greater from it. The security cameras caught her first. Cassandra, standing outside the wrought iron gates with a single suitcase, her once perfect hair limp from travel, makeup smudged from tears or cheap eyeliner. For a long moment, she just stood there, staring up at the estate she'd once laughed at as impossible for a man like Daniel to ever own. When the intercom buzzed in the kitchen, Daniel didn't flinch. He set down the carburetor he'd been cleaning, wiped his hands on a rag, and stepped outside. Liam, now 15, followed at a distance, arms crossed tight. Sarah stayed by the door, watching but silent. At the gate, Cassandra gripped the bars like a prisoner. "Daniel, please. I know I don't deserve it, but I've got nothing left. Victor's gone. Everyone's gone. I don't want your money. I just want to see my son. To be his mother again." Her voice cracked, desperation dripping through every word. For a second, Daniel saw the woman he'd once loved, the mother of his child. But the image shattered against the memory of that rainy night, the divorce papers, the Maybach waiting outside. Before he could answer, Liam stepped forward. His voice wasn't a boy's anymore. It carried the edge of steel his father had given him. "You're not my mother. You're the lady from my nightmares." The words landed like a hammer. Cassandra staggered back a step, face crumbling. She reached for him through the bars, but Liam didn't move. Daniel's voice was calm, even, controlled anger wrapped in finality. "Cassandra, my heart's already full. With my son, with Sarah, with the family we built without you." The gate remained closed. Cassandra's tears blurred into streaks as a taxi pulled up at the curb. She gathered her suitcase with shaking hands, gave one last broken look through the bars, and climbed in. The car pulled away, leaving nothing but exhaust and silence. Daniel rested a hand on Liam's shoulder. The boy didn't flinch. Together, they turned back toward the house, where light spilled warm from the kitchen. The house smelled of cinnamon and motor oil, a strange mix that had become the Whitmore signature. Liam had been baking with Sarah that afternoon, her rolls cooling on the counter, while Daniel tinkered with a carburetor in the garage. It wasn't silent anymore. It was peaceful. Daniel leaned against the doorway, arms folded, watching his son laugh as Sarah flicked flour at him. The boy ducked, grinning wide, his face clear of the shadows that used to haunt him. Sarah caught Daniel's eye and smiled, the kind that didn't need words. He thought of the road that had carried him here. The night Cassandra walked out in silk and diamonds. The storm roared outside while his son cried in his arms. The letter from Marcus that had landed like a hammer in his chest. The years of quiet building, the sweat, the patience, the controlled anger he'd forged into something sharper than revenge. Purpose. Now, standing in a kitchen filled with warmth, he understood. Wealth wasn't the mansion. It wasn't the balance sheets or the IPO that rocketed him into headlines. Those were tools, nothing more. True wealth was in the hands that stayed when the rain came, in the boy who never doubted his father, in the woman who chose him for the man he was, not the fortune he carried. Daniel stepped inside, slipping an arm around Sarah's waist and kissing the top of Liam's head. The storm was long past, but its memory kept him grounded. "Dad." Liam looked up, cinnamon sugar dusting his shirt. "Are we rich?" Daniel chuckled, rough and low, ruffling his son's hair. "Richer than most, kiddo. But not for the reasons you think." And with that, Daniel Whitmore, mechanic, father, builder, closed the book on betrayal. The world might know him as a billionaire, but to the only people who mattered, he was simply the man who never left.
Subscribe and stay one step ahead of cheaters. And trust me, the next story makes this one look like a fairy tale.